Hello, Natasha, and welcome to Business Your Way. Thank you so much for joining me today and coming onto the podcast. I am super excited about our conversation today. But first of all, to kick our episode off, I'd really love if you could introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, who you serve, and what you do in your business to make your moolah.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me on here. It's exciting to be here. So, who am I? I'm Natasya Jones. I have got Divergent Thinking, a business about everyone's brains being wired differently, as well as really, when you take it up a level, about mental well-being. Um,
Mm.
and when it comes to that, was the question also around why did I set it up?
No, just what you do really. So
What we do.
what do you do inside of your business that generates the revenue for your business?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have multiple customers. We work with corporates from the perspective of they want to be more productive and innovative. And a big part of what we do is around educating how different brains are wired differently and helping them realize that certain brains are more productive or certain brains are more innovative. Um, and some brains are more around safety, and especially when you think of the changing environment we're in with AI and things. And some brains are more around structure. So a big part for us is diversity of thought. So we do
Mm,
education in that space. We do that for corporates, um, in order for them to become more productive and innovative, which is such a challenge in New Zealand and internationally, but particularly in New Zealand. And personally, I think from the journey we've been on and my time in the corporate space, society is set up for neurotypical, so jack of all trades, sort of all rounders, which is about 60% of the population. However, society is not set up for the other 40% who are the ones who are highly productive or but aren't particularly social or are really innovative and creative, but struggle with some of the confines of the school environment or the workplace, some of those rules that sometimes organizations haven't even thought about where those rules came from and why we have them.
mm,
Um, but also another really big part for us is community and schools. So for us, you know, mental health starts in the school system, and when we can understand our strengths from a really early age and then maximize those all the way through to the workplace, then we're living in a different world. And the same within the community space. We are very a big part of the education and community space is important to us because of my journey with my son and this and being neurodiverse. So there's many facets, and I enjoy all of them. Actually, to be completely fair, my
mm.
corporate background means I really enjoy thinking in that space too, and challenging in that space.
Yeah. So you do a lot of training or consulting or a bit of both?
We do a bit of both. So we've got a neurodiversity tick. So we have a accreditation and a framework and an audit tool and lots of great tools for how an organization can start to become neuro-inclusive.
Mm,
And we do education around that as well. And we take it from quite a different perspective of it's not so much around recruiting for ADHD people or autistic people. We have a philosophy of we've got two models that we've created. One talks about neurodiversity with a little n. There's 8 billion brains on this planet, and every single one is different. And how do we maximize that different thinking? And then neurodiversity with a big N are those who've got traits strong enough that they'd get a diagnosis if they could or they wanted to. So, and we have programs for both, which
right.
really do focus on strengths and which does absolutely improve mental well-being. So it's a win-win.
Mm. So how would you describe like neurodivergent? So I think that word is relatively new to me. Like I've heard of
Yeah,
all the labels and all the things, but
yeah.
when we talk about neurodivergent and neurotypical, how would you explain like neurodivergent? as a general term to someone who's like, what on earth does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's interesting. I use the word neurodiverse. It's a personal preference. Um,
Mm.
some of the community are very specific around the word neurodivergent. So it's an umbrella term. So in effect, underneath that sits autism. It sits all the labels: autism, ADHD, OCD, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, all of those medical terms that tend to be quite negative. But so it's an
Yeah.
umbrella term that sits underneath it. And when it comes to the word neurodivergent, where it's originally come from, they refer to an individual being neurodivergent or a group of neurodivergent individuals are neurodiverse. However, my
Right.
preference is neurodiverse because I've actually got two labels. I'm ADHD dyslexic, and yeah, I'm just not such a fan of that word. Whereas neurotypical is, yeah, you're sort of all rounders that society's been set up for.
Right. Okay. Okay. Beautiful. So tell me a bit about how you come to start your business, neurodivergent thinking. Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, good question. So it came about through my personal journey with my son, in all honesty. My background is training and coaching in the corporate space. And
Right.
about 6 or 7 years ago, I went to UCLA and did their peers social skills program for autistic individuals. And I came back wanting to make a real difference after my journey with my son for him and others like him. Um, and when I met Anton, our co-founder, who's a forensic psych, and I was looking for supervision, he actually he also worked in the leadership space and felt that what I was looking at was the missing link. You know, we often talk about
Mm.
situational leadership and how you adapt to meet the individual you're engaging with in different situations. But there's often a case of, well, adapt to what?
Mhm.
You know, we know that everybody thinks differently, but how? And that's how we've ended up coming up with a couple of models which actually help you to, when you realize how different brains work, and because we use the little n, there's four quadrants, four types of brains, and it's not to say there's only four types of brains, but we tend to have one more dominant. And when you understand what that brain type needs, the communication, the way they like to be communicated, to get information, to be supported, to thrive, then you really can make a difference in giving them what they need, and vice versa.
Mm.
One of the interesting things I've learned off Anton, is 98% of people don't get out of bed to piss you off. It's just we all come from our own place. We have our own different brain wiring, different emotional journey, history, trauma.
Yeah.
These, when we say you might live in Tasha's world, you literally actually do, because it's made
Mm.
up of all these experiences we've had that have brought us to where we are today.
Yeah. That's so
So,
true.
yeah, and when you can actually communicate in a way or understand why someone's doing what they're doing, then you have compassion and flexibility, because you're like, oh, okay, that's why they need that. And
Mm.
that's actually easy when you understand.
Mm. So, how old's your son? Just out of curiosity.
He turned 15 on Sunday, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, this has been quite a journey for you. So, like, if you don't
Mm.
mind, can you
Mm.
tell us a bit about how the discovery of his neurodiversity like came about? What was that like for you in his younger years in discovering that, he did have different needs?
Yeah, it's been a really big journey. It's a lot
Mm.
of parents go through the same, which is sad. Even 10 years on, one of our team is going through realizing her 6-year-old is, he's getting in trouble at school because he's energetic and he struggles to sit in the seats, or all those traditional
Mm.
things.
Mm.
And yeah, it hasn't changed a great deal. For us, it started, yeah, when he was just before he started school, and his behavior changed quite a lot, and trying to work out why it had changed and why he was reactive and he was lashing out and all of
Mm.
those things. And in all honesty, it was really hard to work it out, to know where to go for support. And I just happened to be at the doctor's one day with him and his little brother, and it just imploded between them. And, all my friends have been saying, oh, it's all very typical boy behavior. And I was like, I'm super
Mm,
struggling with this. And it's one of those things, I know people try to normalize and make you feel better, but they actually don't realize that it makes you feel worse, because it means you're struggling with what is normal and you actually feel worse. But luckily, the
mm,
doctor went, no, it's actually not normal behavior. Didn't really know where to send me, but she did have a psychiatrist or psychologist card, and we started that journey.
right.
So the journey was tough. It was expensive. And once you get diagnosed, doesn't mean you necessarily can find good support. So I ended up in
Mm,
the system with quite bad depression, trying to navigate, support him, etc. So that's the reason I've set up the business. My background's coaching and training, and I'd done a
yeah,
few not-for-profit programs, and they were okay, but they didn't get to the crux of what helped me every day. And that's what I have the privilege of now. We create programs that literally help me and my family and my son. Um, and every day's different. Like, he's 15, 6'1", and now he's going through the challenges of high school.
yeah.
It never really stops. But at least I have support to reach out to and ask questions to, good quality, which makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Like really filling that need in our society for
Mm,
parents, like in your situation. Just before we started recording, you also said to me, 3 years ago, had your own realization around being neurodiverse yourself.
yeah.
How has that How has that experience of your son and yourself shaped the way that you've approached building your own business?
Yeah, good question. It's so yeah, I did realize 3 years ago that I'm ADHD. I've got dyslexic traits. It is genetic, so makes
Mm,
sense. How
mm,
it shaped my journey in creating the business, it was a needs must. And, now I look back, and my ADHD behaviors is going, actually, I want to make a difference. I want to help other people. I don't want them to go through what I went through. And creating programs with Anton works, excuse me, really well, because he has amazing knowledge in the psychs field. But then I'm always able to go, so what does that mean for me as a parent? Well, what does that mean for
mm,
a child? Or particularly because we've created these models, and my dyslexic brain always goes, so how does this information relate back into the model? Because I'm always been taught to simplify and make it the easiest possible, most basic language if you can. And
mm,
that's definitely made a difference. And touch wood, I've run training parts of the business and organizations, and people are very seldom everybody's happy or everybody turns up. But touch wood, we've never had a complaint about a program, because it's, which is really amazing. I know, and and we've had some tough cookies come through, so
yeah.
that's really neat.
Do you think we are currently living in a society where people are, or society in general, is open to the idea that we are actually all different compared to, 50 years ago? We all had to fit in a box, and, my whakapapa is I'm Māori, so the the journey of colonization through my grandmother, my mother, the stories are horrific.
Yeah.
Society wanted to put you in a box and make you all normal,
Hmm.
including stripping of language and culture and everything. But we now live in 2024. Do you think society is more open and accepting that we are actually all individuals with our own different needs on how we function and how we see the world?
That's a good question. I think academically we get that everybody thinks differently. However,
Mm,
when people behave differently, people are often surprised. Um, and we saw it rampantly with COVID, where then you add in people being shut. and their emotions, skyrocketing. Some people, I really didn't cope well with being ADHD and not being able to leave the house or engage with people, face to face. So I think there's more awareness of the terminology.
Right.
However, I think, and I'm finding we get the greatest inroads with the tertiary space, where you've got the people or the companies we've worked with, realizing that they're do have a lot more of neurodiverse, ADD, ADHD, dyslexic, etc., who have
Mm.
struggled in the school system going into tertiary. And it's wonderful that they're really keen to support and learn. Some workplaces, I met with someone yesterday and she was phenomenal, but she was actually European descent originally. And so I think maybe that's why people say they're open to it, but the challenge is that the expectations that I'm hearing at the moment, which I'm not enjoying, is some organizations are saying they just need to come to us and tell us what they need. Um, and it's like, if these organizations realize that the trauma that our school system causes our
Mm.
neurodiverse youth because they
Mhm.
don't sit still or they struggle to learn or focus.
Mm.
And, it only takes 2 to 3 years in our school system for our neurodiverse youth, New Zealand and internationally, to think about suicide to get away from it. For my son, it was 5 years. And that's
Wow.
really scary. And from the
Yeah.
age of 10, they're often self-harming. And this is our school system.
Mm.
And my son, it was 13, with me heavily advocating. So when you consider they're asking adults who've been through this and more to then suddenly be able to advocate for themselves and get themselves, to me, it's just not okay.
Yeah.
It's like all relationships. We need to learn how we thrive, how others thrive, and how to create psychologically safe environments for
Mm.
everybody. Like you say, I've noticed when I listen to different groups speak, different minority groups, like you shared, we all go through the same challenges. And the
Mm.
reason we went with wanting to cater to all neurodiversity is because autism's 3% of the population, ADHD is about 15, dyslexia and dyscalculia is about 20, but as an overarching group, it's about 40 because a lot of people have more than one. So how do we
Mm.
have a louder voice and how do we, stand together? And I think no matter what minority group you are, um, I
Mm.
think that, the more we highlight what's gone on in the past, and they're very similar to some degree,
Mm.
then actually maybe we might get some cut through. But, a lot of it's the stigma and judgment, which comes from lack of information. So that's
Yeah.
why we educate.
Yeah.
Education means that people can realize, and when we take a strengths-based approach, because strengths-based leadership also improves mental well-being.
Mm. Mhm.
And we focus on physical well-being, but we don't focus on mental well-being because people don't really know what to do. And
Yeah.
that's where we think we've got a real point of difference. Ours is
Yeah.
actually mental well-being 101.
Yeah. And like, I totally agree, because when you are just who you are, like, you don't
Yeah.
realize that you're different to anybody else.
No,
I
yeah.
mean, I have this innate ability to see patterns, join the dots really quickly.
Mhm.
And I've spent lots of years in the event industry because a client would say to me, "Oh, this is the event that I want to create." And I instantly can paint a picture of what that looks like and how it's going to happen and how it's going to, just come together. Like it, in my brain,
Mhm.
it comes together very quickly. And then I can reverse engineer that into everything that needs to happen. And one of my team members said to me a few years ago, she goes, "You realize that no one else can do that, right?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? Like,
Mhm.
it's super easy. Like, she wants to,
Mhm.
the client wants to do this. This is how that happens. You've been in this property before. Like, this isn't your first rodeo. Like, surely you can see how this is going to roll out." She goes, "No, no, no, we can't. We don't get that." And so it's like when we're inside the jar, we can't read the label. You know,
No, that's a good
so
phrase.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
so how do we go to our employers, or how do we go to other people around us and say what we need when actually we can't read the label because we're inside the jar, you know?
Yeah, yeah, you're so close to home that you can't actually, yeah, totally. And what you're describing does sound quite a lot like dyslexic traits. I mean, I've spoken to farmers or cabinet makers who've said how they
Mm,
can see the kitchen in their head and then
mm,
they draw it first time. I mean, that's a phenomenal skill. Or a
mm,
farmer, gosh, I think his name's Brian, and he's down in the top of the South Island, and he describes how he has people come and do these calculations for feed and stuff for his farm, and he's like, I can see my paddock in 3D, and he said, and I can work it out within a few millimeters, and I'm just like, that's your superpower. Um,
mm.
the challenge that
Yeah.
goes with that is, as a farmer, you have to be every other thing, which it's really hard to be, right? Or,
Yeah,
business owner, whatever it might be.
yeah.
So
So
no, we
you,
don't always
it's all,
realize what we're good at.
yeah, so it's all well and good someone saying, an organization saying, oh, well, you just need to let us know what your needs are. It's like, but how do I know? Because isn't this what everyone else needs too? Like,
Yeah.
how do you know that you're different? Like, yeah, that's the hard piece. It's like all well and good asking and saying we should all step up, but we just don't know what we don't know until we do know.
Yeah, and that's why we'd really like to get it out there more around what we do, is particularly around the mental well-being element, right? Because,
Yeah.
and you're dead right, when we run our workshops and I'm the sort of person who loves the face-to-face more so, and you
Mm,
can see the penny drop for some people because they're just like,
mm,
isn't everyone good at this? And I'm like, no way. I'm not organized. I'm a great schmoozer, but I'm not. And then it's really lovely when they get that, and they
mhm,
part of our workshops is actually realizing what your strengths are and really taking that on board, and how do you maximize that,
yeah.
as well as, the other side of it is when you have super talents. It's like capital I refer to it. When you've got super talents, of course, because life's balanced generally, you're going to have super challenges. So
Yeah.
that's part of it for us, is like, how do you maximize your strengths, and how do you
Mm,
manage or mitigate your challenges, and have
mm,
other people around you, other people with different brain wiring, so that you don't have to be all things to all people. You can
mm.
just do what you do really well. And, as a team, you're far greater, stronger if it's a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, I want to dive into the opening paragraph that's on your website. So as soon as you go to your website, the first thing that you read is, why is neurodiversity important to your organization? I know
Yep.
we've slightly touched on this, but do you want to dive into that a little deeper of why this is so critical?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. Well, because as we just said, neurodiversity is critical for an organization, because something I've learned on the journey with Anton is the human brain is attracted to other brains like it naturally. We like familiarity, we like similarity. However, the
Mm,
challenge is when we have that only, then we are having brains like us, and then we've got that same thinking, which, if you don't get the other brains, which, some brains are more productive, and data focused or knowledge focused, and
mm,
some brains are more innovative and creative, ADHD and dyslexia and dyscalculia. Autism, OCD is the productive and data, or they can be structured as well. And then you've got your empaths, to generalize the four sort of dominant areas, who create the glue and the culture, and they're great with the stakeholders and things like that. So when you consider New Zealand's low productivity and innovation, and the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs are ADHD, ADD, dyslexic, haven't fitted into the school system or the work environment, we are missing out on those amazing things, skills and knowledge. And, the challenges, and I love challenging, a lot of executives sort of sit in that data subject matter expert, keeping things, doing it the same way. And I'm like, if you don't look at how you do it differently, then the only way you're going to increase productivity is by working people longer and harder. But then
mm,
that reduces engagement, that reduces
mhm,
mental well-being. It's
mm,
a downward cycle. So
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to have at the top table, and ideally in every team, a data person, a structure person, a empath connector, and a creative innovator, and discuss and hear before moving forward, so that you can max. That's when you are getting true diversity of thought, when you're
Mm.
hearing all of those ways of thinking and looking at what you can do differently, or maybe it's not the right time, but at least you're making a conscious choice.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if you saw on there as well, there's the Gartner megatrend. I think it's on there as well. So Gartner's a international research company, and they brought out a megatrend late last year, which Carl Beetham shared with us. He's the group CEO of Gallagher. He's neurodiverse and very loud and
Oh,
proud,
okay.
brilliant. And they brought out a megatrend, Gartner, which I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently years and
Yeah.
years ago, it was like Wi-Fi was a megatrend that nobody knew about. And the megatrend said that by 2027, 25% of Fortune 500 businesses will be actively recruiting neurodivergent brains like autism because of the productivity,
Yeah.
ADHD because of the creativity and innovation, and dyslexia for the same reason. So,
Mm.
yeah, the people are starting to realize it. They just don't quite know. Well, yeah, it's a starting point, but they don't know what that means or what to do with it, generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what do you think are some like misconceptions business owners have about
Mm.
neurodiversity and how to maximize that kind of a brain?
Yeah, I mean, there's misconceptions everywhere,
Mm.
Um, even at my son's school, the principal shared a book in a newsletter recently that basically he said, "Oh, it's not saying that there isn't such a thing as ADHD, but it's a good read." It was just like, wow. Yeah. There are so many misconceptions. I mean, ADHD can be perceived as laziness or just not trying hard enough, or bad, disruptive or naughty, or, and dyslexia people don't know what it is. They think kids just need to try harder to read better, or maths, but a lot of it goes back to the medical system. It's the deficit focus of needing to be fixed. So
Mm.
it's rampant. But when an individual and an organization are educated, we've got people on the team who've worked with high flying leaders in firms, who one of them was being performance managed because they were seen with their head on the desk once or twice a week. And so, they were in discussions, and then through working with one of our team, that person realized even in those 3 days, they were 130% more productive than most people, which meant the other day or two, they needed to just recover.
Mm.
And once they were able to, once they realized and then could articulate, then the manager got it, and the team are getting it. And now that person is actually about 140% productive, and they're coping really well with the 4-day week. So
Mm.
again, it's like you said before, we often don't realize what is going on inside the jar. But
Yeah.
when we do, again, we often take a look at behaviors across the surface, whether it's school or work or life. And I
Yeah.
often say to people when they ask the question, I'm like, all behavior is functional. And it's a case of sometimes, and it's also a form of communication. And often it's a case of just stopping and asking or looking and working out what's sitting underneath that. And is it like everything else? Because often the behavior looks the same, but what's driving it can be really, really different.
Mm. Mm. And really, it's only the symptoms, like putting your head on
Yeah.
your desk is just a symptom of what's going on, right? But then they're performance managing the symptom instead of actually looking at what's deeper.
You've hit the nail on the head. That happens everywhere. In our school
Mm.
systems at work, we see behavior, and behavior can look similar, but we don't
Mm.
stop and go, why is that person behaving that way? Anton says it. He says all behavior is functional to that individual. Even if in that moment it seems dysfunctional to you, there is
Yeah.
a very good reason why that person is doing that. And
Mm.
I find I do that so often that even my kids are like, "Mummy, why do you stick up for those kids all the time?" Because I'm like, "Well, they sound a bit ADHD. It sounds like they're," and they're like, "Could you just listen to me?" And I'm like, "Okay, sorry." Yeah, it's like yeah, because I used to do the opposite, and now I'm just like, "Oh, I want to help everybody." Um,
Yeah,
and it's often we're just going so fast, we just don't, and you don't know what you don't know. Like you said
yeah,
before,
yeah,
once you start to get these insights, you go, I mean, we had it with the school, we worked with the school, and they shared that this Maori boy wasn't really picking up English at school, and they thought he wasn't really writing or speaking it. And they said, oh, he speaks Maori at home, not English, and that's probably why. And I was like, is he maybe dyslexic? Have you looked at that? And they were like, oh, didn't think of that. And I'm like, I said, I don't know, but it's a possibility. And
yeah,
it's just, why is he not picking that up? Because most
yeah,
kids go to school, they don't want to be different to each other. They actually
yeah,
hate being different to each other. I wish they wouldn't.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, I knew nothing about this 10 years ago.
But there's that social pressure too. When you're at school, you just want to fit in, you want to be like everyone else, and then you're not, and so then yeah, then that societal piece comes into being, which plays
Oh,
on
yeah.
us.
Social
Um,
conforming is big.
yeah, right.
Hmm.
And then we carry that on as adults and into the workplace, and all kinds of things carry on. Um, but I want to bring it back to like business owners. I know
Hmm.
in my journey, I've been in business 23 years, and I've come across so many other people in business. And, I remember very early on, there was this business owner. He had a really successful business, and he used to take people out on his boat for fishing trips, and that was his business. Highly successful, but he was
Yeah.
dyslexic. And he
Yeah.
never had that at all. It's just like, yeah, I don't write, I don't do emails. I get someone else to do the emails. I tell them what I need, and they go do it for me. And so he'd found this whole way of navigating business by getting others like around him. And he has always stuck in my mind, because I'm like, man, he's just an example of what's possible.
Mm.
And we all need that example of what's possible. Just do, you can have dyslexia, but don't let that hold you back. That example has always stuck with me. So, as business owners, there are so many things in the world that it's like, you should do business like this. You should follow this method to be successful. You should do this, to get this outcome. And everyone's got a method, and everyone's got the right way. And which
Hmm.
is why my podcast is called Business Your Way, because we can just all do business our own way and be super successful.
Yeah.
But what are some kind of strategies, or maybe what are some self-care practices that, even as an undiagnosed neurodivergent person or business owner, because people are listening to us and going, gosh, like, I see that in myself, or I see that in myself, but they're
Mm.
undiagnosed. But because sitting inside the jar, this has just been my
Yeah.
life my whole time. So, what are kind of some self-care practices that you would recommend, or some ways of examining our own behavior, and then thinking about some things that we could do that would benefit us? Because the diagnosis might not be for everyone. Like, they just want to cope with who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great question. And there's a lot to that. One
Mm,
is we talk about self-identifying. To us, you don't need to have a diagnosis. Um, However, I do think from a self-care and setting strategies to best suit us and our work or family or life in general, the number one thing would be learning about how your brain works. I mean,
mm,
love to, if any one of your listeners wants to join one of our intros, absolutely love to give you a discount code, and they can do that. We've got ADHD and dyslexia and dyscalculia and autism coming up. because I think the sooner you get, like we've just finished an ADHD program, a 6-week online, and I forget what I've learned. And in it, you hear people come in and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that was part of my ADHD. I just thought I was shit at that. And it's like, and it's really cathartic to go, ah, and we go, no, that's how your brain works. And they're like, ah, and it's like, yes. And now you can learn tools to maximize your strengths, manage and mitigate in your challenges, realize when you're coming towards burnout, because burnout looks different for
Mm,
dyslexia, dyscalculia, for men, for women, for hormones. Um,
mm,
how often do we stop and think about what triggers us, which is part of what we do, and then to start having tools and building tools to use at different points. We just, we really don't. But I think from a, like you say, it's the challenge when it's your own business is it kind of, and I mean, we're still a startup. The challenge is actually putting down the work and walking away from it sometimes, right? And actually,
yeah.
so even having a lunch break sometimes, like I know in summer, I'm like a 10-minute drive from the beach. If I can even get to the beach at lunchtime for a dip in the sun for 20 minutes, I come back a different person. I'm solar powered though. I'm an outside, so it's going, what makes you thrive? What is it? Is it that quiet time? Is it that the outdoors? Is it the and and how do you do that at least once a day? That's, and for me being ADHD, often it's scheduling it in. Like if I don't
Mm,
schedule things in my diary, they do not happen. Um,
I
yeah,
hear.
they don't. I live by my diary. It's
Mhm.
yeah, and it's finding those tools. What are the tools that help you, that remind you? Um, but yeah, having that, what are the things that balance you, and who are the people around you? Like I've got someone in the team now who is that structural person, and she
Mhm.
helps me stay away from having 20 new ideas every day, because that's so ADHD, to going, what is our goal and what do we need to do to get there? And even we did an ADHD roadshow recently, which was around the same time we did the Creative Spaces conference.
Yeah.
And when we got back, we did a reflection. And instead of me racing off and doing something next, we actually learnt some really good lessons from that. So it's the having others around you who get you, who can help, um, bring that balance and reflection. But it's also really huge around your self-care time, which can be the hardest. And I say it and I don't always do it, but
Mm,
it's that regular practice.
yeah. And spending some time, like I found, spending some time to actually work out what are my strengths,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
what are the things that I don't want to do, uh,
Hmm.
or the things that I'm not good at. Over the years, I've taught myself almost to be good at everything because because
Yeah.
sometimes that's how my brain kind of works. Um, but actually spending some time to really narrow down things that I'm good at, what are my strengths, how does that function? And I've probably spent the last 4 or 5 years going down that rabbit hole of, you know, rather than doing everything and
Mm.
feeling exhausted,
Yeah.
actually, who am I when it comes to what am I good at? What lane should I stay in? What
Mm.
lights me up? What drains my energy? And it
Yeah.
wasn't anything around like finding out whether I was neurodiverse. I'm like, that didn't even enter my head altogether. I was more like, how can I really be a better business owner by knowing
Mm.
myself a lot
Yeah.
better?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Leadership
yeah,
starts at home, right? But it's often hard.
yeah.
Um, we've actually got an amazing card deck that we use for doing that, working out what your
Mm,
motivational drivers are.
oh, nice.
And then, it's really cool because, when we start off our Getting Self workshops with it. And it's funny because, a lot of the people we're working with are sort of 40s and 50s. And I'll always go, let's do a card sort. And I'm like, the first bit of motivational drivers, we say these Gen Zers or Gen AIs won't get out of bed for anything that they don't want to do, and I'm like, bloody good on them. I was taught
Yeah.
to get out of bed for a job to pay the
Yeah.
bills, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas with this card deck, we work out that, and your motivational drivers can change with age and stage, right? Like, you know,
Right.
different. But
Yeah.
then the second part is we work out what are your strengths, and then those fit into almost our quadrants, and you kind of work out what are your strengths, the four biggest ones, because we have 16 cards, and then we go with them. It's interesting because there can be predictable challenges from a brain wiring perspective. Um, and it's very seldom that people turn over the cards. And I did it yesterday with a new client, and she was like, "Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my god." You know, and it's like, yeah, and that's cool. Then you go, how do I manage or mitigate these? Because sometimes your challenges, you're just out of your sweet spot. They're just a little bit overused.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other thing I would say, people often, when they do these sorts of exercises, it's often they think of work, whereas we go whole of life. Because when you're in a
Right.
certain job or industry, you can work yourself a certain way, whereas when you go whole of life, then you'll start to and natural, rather than, like you say, things that you've learnt with tools to, I always say, keep myself out of trouble. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what are those things you love that will make you want to get out of bed? And then who
Yeah.
do you have around to support you, right, to do the other stuff?
Mm.
And often they love it. So great.
Yeah. Love that. Beautiful. Natasha, I would love to be able to give my listeners, contact details to put themselves in touch with you. And thank you so much for offering up that discount code. I think that would be super valuable as well.
Absolutely.
I usually ask all my guests some questions around what are the three things that you would share other business owners, and I'm going to add another piece to that. What would you say to business owners who, are neurodiverse and are growing their business? What are three things that you would share with them around, you know, having a successful business and being neurodivergent?
Yeah, great. Three things, and I think we've touched on them already. I think number one, you and I both discuss, is playing to your strengths and where you
Mm,
can delegate what you're not so good at. That's absolutely, because that makes you buzz and want to keep going, right?
mm,
Um, Number two is building systems that work for your brain.
mm,
Not, and they may not necessarily be the traditional or the ones that are out there, but what works for you. And I think number three, and I've gotten better and better on my journey as I've become more my authentic self, is just be yourself. And when you need to celebrate, celebrate, and when you need help, ask for help. You know,
mm.
it can be a lonely place at times
Yeah.
when you're running your own business. So
Mm,
I love the idea of meeting more people in the same space and learning from them because of that very reason.
love that. Yeah, and when you are comfortable in your own skin, like anything is
Yeah.
possible, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
sometimes you might think, oh, this is a batshit crazy idea. But when you've got people that go, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And it's going, right, well, let's do it together then, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Love that so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I've probably got a list of 10 more questions that I could ask you. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing this conversation, having this conversation. Everything about it just lights me up because I'm so sold on this concept that we all can run our own business our own way. We just have to figure out what works for us and lean into that and create a business. And your success is going to look different to somebody else's success, and what you do in your business is going to look different to somebody else. It's just how we find and allow ourselves space and time to explore how we want to run our business. And so everything that you've brought to the podcast today just speaks into that with so much volume that I loved everything. So thank you so much for sharing everything today. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Look, thank you so much for inviting me along. I've enjoyed it too. I hope that we can continue the conversation again soon.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Alrighty, I'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you.